Good morning, everyone. We told you we'd be back. We are Flyer and Ice. Above me with the white hat is Nick Descaltasti. I am Dan Green, and we are joined by the Gulf Storm scout, Pete Judge of the OHL. Pete, thank you so much for joining us. We cannot wait to talk about the first round with you. Thank you for joining Flyer and Ice.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Now, before we start, just a reminder, you can find us on YouTube. Subscribe, tap the bell, and you'll be informed of all our great programming, including Flyer and Ice and Heat Ratio Live, our parent show. All right, so Pete, the first question I'll start off with is, were you at all surprised that not only did Shane Wright not go number one, that he even dropped to number 4? One mock draft I saw had it play out exactly that way. What were your thoughts on that?
So I definitely was not surprised he didn't go 1. I've been hearing rumblings for the better part of probably close to 2 months now that there's been a lot of teams that have not had him at 1. I think Slafkovsky was kind of the obvious choice of someone who overtook him. I know people had Cooley in that spot too. I did think at the end of the day that Montreal was going to pick Shane Wright. I really did. I went into today or last night thinking it was I figured he would go 1, but it wasn't surprising. To see him drop to 4, I was very surprised by, though. I didn't think he'd go.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, let me ask you this: was it lack of games on film because of COVID? Is it something people discovered with his personality they didn't like? What do you think caused the drop?
You know what I think it honestly was people looking at Shane Wright and thinking, this is a player who we really liked 2 years ago, but we don't know how much better he's gotten over the last 2 years. He scored 40 goals in the OHL as a 15-year-old, but he hasn't put up numbers that make it look. He hasn't significantly improved his offensive production since then. So I think teams were looking at him and saying, like, hey, this was a guy who was kind of a grown man at 14, 15 years old, and the production is stagnating, and maybe this is just it. Some guys just hit their peak early, and I think some teams are probably scared off by that with Shea. Again, I think Wright's going to be a really good NHL player. And obviously going at 4, you're expecting him to be a really good NHL player. But I think the idea with Slafkovsky at least was like, this is still a guy who's learning. This is still a guy who's growing and getting better every day, where Wright, you're not seeing the progression every day. So I think that was kind of the logic there.
That makes sense.
So Pete, I know you're, I believe you're last time, you're an Islanders fan, right? So, I mean, this is the Flyers podcast.
I'm not.
And, oh, you're not? I thought you were. I'm sorry.
I'm not. No,
I know you're a Long Island guy, so I just kind of assumed that. Anyway, seeing Nemec being taken second to the Devils is almost, I feel like, kind of a blessing in disguise for the fans of teams other than Devils and the Met. And not to take anything away from Nemec, but based off who was available, like Slafkovsky or Wright or whoever it may be. What do you think about that pick at number 2 for the Devils?
Yeah, I think Nemec is a really good player. he definitely, for me, he was the number 2 defenseman available. I had Jiricek over him. I think Jiricek's a little bit more complete. I think Jiricek compares to a guy maybe like John Carlson. He's big. He plays a little physical. He's got a big shot. Whereas Nemec, I think he's more of a risk taker, right? So if you're looking for a guy who's going to put up big numbers, but maybe be not nearly as responsible in the defensive end, Nemec is your guy. I think he's going to put up a lot of points in the league. I just think that he's also going to be very frustrating for Devils fans. Again, probably would not be my pick at number 2. Definitely would not be my pick at number 2, but a good player. Again, a guy I think will have a good NHL career and put up numbers and be a good defenseman. But yeah, I think passed on some guys that would be a little bit stronger for their team.
Well, it's funny. You kind of incorporated my next question. I was going to ask you to compare the 2 top D-men, and you did, which is fine. And I'm ad-libbing a little bit here because I'm wondering if Nemec was taken second based on the recent success of Fox and Makar. You've got the 5'11", 6-foot guys that won the Norris back-to-back, and I wonder if the copycat type player syndrome is kicking in. Just a thought with their success to go that route. To build on Nick's question though, and your answer, with the way the board fell, were you surprised at the part 2 of the question? I guess to build on Nick is, with Jiricek available for the Flyers at number 5, I was hoping they would take him. So they ultimately took Gauthier. Give us a breakdown between why Gauthier would have been the pick for you over Jiricek, unless you don't think it's that way.
I think probably there's between the 2 in terms of where their value is, right? The Flyers need a lot, right? I think we're all probably in agreement that the Flyers are in a position they just needed to get the best guy. Again, I think Jiricek is a pretty complete defenseman. I know there's some concerns about his skating. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think it's a little ugly, but he's really efficient and effective and gets around. And he's fast. He's a quick skater. He just looks a little ugly. Gauthier, though, I'm a big fan of. I really think the sky's the limit with him. I think if you're looking for a power forward, there's probably not a better guy in this class. He just plays the right way. He's a 200-foot guy, gets up and down the ice. Big shot. He's probably a little bit more skilled than people give him credit for. He's a really good player. I think he could be a cornerstone piece for any team moving forward. Obviously, the Flyers picked him, so cornerstone piece for the Flyers. I think he's a guy that, if everything kind of goes right for him, he could end up being one of the top players in this draft class. My one concern with his game, and it's definitely something that over the last 6 months, the last back half of his last season, I've noticed has gotten better. It was always consistency. I've kind of followed Cutter Gauthier since he was maybe around 13. And the one thing I've always felt with him is like, man, the sky's the limit with this kid, but you don't always see it, right? Like there's games where he's all in. There's games where he's not all in. He'll give you 3 or 4 great shifts and then 2 or 3 not so great shifts. And, if he could figure it out, again, sky's the limit with him. He could be a really, really top player. So I don't disagree with the pick at all. I think it was probably the right move.
All right. Flyer fans are happy to hear that.
Pete, being an East Coast scout and watching so many young kids, American kids, develop over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, how is the NTDP really changing hockey for American-born players? And what's it's coming to the point where it's become almost total domination now with how U.S. really exposes itself to young players.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, I think for a lot of young players, their focus is making the national team, right? I think all of these guys, first thing on their mind is, I want to go to the national team development program, and everything else is secondary. If I don't make it, I'll think about that later. I'll think about it when I get there. I think it goes a little bit. I think there's positives and negatives to it, right? The good thing with it is that, or the good thing for those kids is, they're being looked at from the national team at 14, 15 years old and being tracked. And so they have their pick, right? Like, all those guys who are being picked there are the best players in the country, and are guys that are being picked with the idea that we're going to develop them into National Hockey League players. As far as what it does for the rest of the hockey landscape in the country, I think that we could have a little bit of a debate there. There was no USHL players picked today or last night, right? There will be today, of course. I'm sure it'll happen, but you have a strong concentration of guys at the top, and maybe not so strong of a group below them. And again, I think you could make an argument both ways on what it's done for hockey in the U.S., but hard to argue that the top end guys aren't getting really good development playing against the best of the best every day at practice, right?
Absolutely.
So you kind of touched on Gauthier, that I guess a negative for you is, does he take some shifts off? So just because, again, we're Flyer centric, let's say someone's just tuning in now. Give us the pros and cons of Gauthier, as far as, would you both agree that 1 year in college and then boom, he comes right into our squad?
I think it's possible. I think it's possible that he's a one and done guy. I think it's also possible he does 2 or 3. In terms of positives and negatives, I mean, positive is he's got a typical NHL body, right? He's 6'3", he's over 200 pounds already. He's a grown man at 18 years old. He's big, he's fast, he's powerful, he's strong. He's got a mean streak to him. I think Flyers fans are going to love him, right? He plays tough. He does all the little things. He can get to the dirty areas and make plays. He's got a big shot. Again, I think his skill is a little understated. I think he doesn't have a lead skill, right? Like, he's not at the same level as like a Savoy, right? Savoy, a couple picks later, is just an ultra skilled forward. Gauthier isn't that guy. He's skilled, but he's not elite skilled. Again, the negatives, I think, are he doesn't have high end skill, and I've always had concerns with his consistency, but over the back half of the season, I think it's gotten a lot better. And I've also heard from people who are a little bit more connected that it's kind of been a maturity thing for him, maybe. And they feel like he's grown a lot this year as a person.
How is his a 2-part question? Have you seen him play center, and can he move from wing to center in the NHL? And how is his hockey IQ? I would imagine that's pretty high.
Yeah, I think he has played center a good bit at the national team. I don't think it's not his primary position for the program, but he has played it a decent amount. I don't know that I would necessarily say that he's a sure bet to play center in the NHL, but it's, again, definitely possible. I think his hockey IQ is good. I think he's a guy who, like I said, he plays 200-foot game. He's smart. He goes up and down. Like, he plays a little bit. He does everything you need him to do, right? I don't think he's a guy that is ever going to wow you either way, but
right.
But is going to do all the right things and do all the little things.
Real quickly before we move on, we have your name Ryan, who's been checking the past 2 days. Thank you very much, Ryan. Ryan, I love you already, but you write War and Peace comments, so it's hard for me as the host. He's essentially saying the Flyers just have needs everywhere. They need skill, speed, energy, guys with stamina, play both ways, and it just, it's a 4-part, as you can see, um, comment. So, Adam, we appreciate you checking in, and
Right.
we're in total agreement. The Flyers need everything. And I'll tie in Chicago soon. Now, Chicago needs everything too, and I guess they figured they would try to get 3 things in the first round at the stake of getting rid of some guys, which I think was a mistake, but we'll talk about that later. Um, I guess I'll pull up the board now. And as I pull up the board, I'm gonna ask you this question. Um, Biggest surprises, and I'll say both taken too high and someone that you thought was taken too low. For me, and Nick will know who I'm gonna say. I love Joachim Kemmel, and I think he's gonna be the Matthew Barzal of this draft, where you're gonna be like, he was taken. I think Matthew was taken 16 or 17 in 2015, and he's one of the elite players of that class. So I think Kemmel could be that guy. That's just my opinion, and I'd like to hear it from the expert. That guy taken too high and someone too low.
So I'll say right off the bat, I think Kemmel has superstar potential too. I'm with you on that. That's just a guy who he can score so many types of goals, and he's such a pure goal scorer, and his offensive talents are through the roof. In terms of like purely offensive guys, he's got to be top 3 or 4 in the class for me. So I was shocked he went as late as he did. I wasn't surprised he got out of the top 7 or 8, but I was definitely surprised he didn't get picked in the top 10. And to fall to 17, yeah, I'm pretty surprised by that. He went 17, right? Yeah,
Correct.
I'm looking at the board right here. Okay. The one guy that I gotta say, and this is probably not me or me not doing my due diligence really, is Sam Rinzel to Chicago. I was pretty surprised by.
I was going to bring him up too.
Yeah, a guy honestly that I've only seen a handful of times. Looks promising. He's big. He skates pretty well. He's got some skill, but just not really a guy who's on my radar as a Minnesota kid and playing Minnesota high school hockey and only playing a handful of games in the USHL. He only really saw him for a couple of games. So not a guy I had really heard about going in the first round either. So that was a surprising one for me. I think the other guy, honestly, Vancouver at 15 took Lekkerimaki. Lekkerimaki was a guy I thought could easily go top 10. Really, really skilled goal scorer too, just like Kemmel. You know what? I think, in my opinion, getting goal scorers is the hardest thing to find. And when you can find them in the draft, I think you go after them. And I think those are 2 guys that are going to score a lot of goals in the NHL. And I'm surprised. I'm surprised both of them fell out of the top 10.
Pete, who do you think, if you had to pick one team from yesterday that really just nailed the draft, who would you go with?
Oh, it's tough. I mean, hard to argue with Montreal, right? I think they did really well. I liked Buffalo's picks. I think Ostlund and Kulich are both guys that are going to have long NHL careers. And, I don't know that either one of them is a star. I think Ostlund has a good shot. But he's a couple years away for sure. He's a guy that I think just needs to get a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. And when he does eventually come over, he can be a really top player. And I think Kulich is the same kind of thing. He will get a little bit stronger, a little bit faster, come over in a couple of years, and I think he can be a really nice player for them in a couple of years. Buffalo is definitely the other team that I looked at and was like, yeah, okay.
And Savoy. I mean, with
their sorry. I mean, I'm not even thinking about Savoy, but yeah. Savoy, again, I think, other than the concerns about his size, he's probably the most skilled player in this draft.
And that's I remember Nick in previous shows, mentioning Matt Savoy as someone to keep an eye on. So good on you, Nick. And again, now from the Flyers' perspective, like as our commenter Ryan mentioned. Oh, here we go. Ryan's Matthew Savoy. Yeah, Urov is a great player, and the Capitals. I love the Capitals pick. I'm not even going to try his name. I don't know. Ivan M. I always butcher his name, but he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and he's recovering, but a lot of people think he's one of the most talented, if not the most talented player in the draft if he was healthy. So assuming he recovers as Mario did, hopefully he will light things up for the Capitals. I mean, obviously that hurts all non-Capital fans, but from a wishing a kid well perspective, I hope the kid has a great career.
100%. Just to comment on that, I mean, he is just unbelievable what he's gone through this year, and I think obviously everyone's hoping the best for him. Definitely a kid that going into the year was being talked about as a top 5 kind of player, and obviously with what he's dealt with, it's been hard to see him play, hard to really see where he's at, and I think the Capitals probably do have a steal on their hands, and Urov too. I think Urov is a really good player, really, really high end, but the concerns there with everything going on in Russia makes sense that he fell the way he did, right?
Right. The Capitals have a Russian connection, obviously, in more than one way to do a little recruitment. So getting back to Gauthier, this just popped in my head, and maybe Nick can elaborate and feel my concern, pain. You mentioned he does a lot of things well, and he's just a man-child right now. And since the Flyers have so many needs, and one of the needs is someone with grit that'll stick up for their teammates. And in today's NHL, you need grit with skill, like a Tom Wilson type. I think the Bryant Reeves of the game are going to go by. He's the last of the true goons, guy with not a lot of skill that is still in the league. But generally, your tough guys, a la Wayne Simmons and Tom Wilson, Wayne's getting old in the tooth. You have to have skill and contribute offensively and be your team's enforcer at the same time. So does Gauthier have at least that potential? Is he a guy that is willing to drop his gloves? Because it does concern me that based on your answer that he's not the kind of guy, especially if moved to center, that's going to undress you going through the neutral zone. He seems more of a a guy that'll snipe off the pass. The Flyers are in desperate need of the Matthew Barzals of the world that can undress you through the neutral zone, back up the defensive core, and generate offense that way. And you just mentioned Kemmel and Savoy, who probably can do that. That's a concern I have with the Flyers team as a whole, and you can't get that in one pick. So curve my stress over that. And am I right with the enforcer part of it? It's a long question, but I got so much in my head.
Yeah, you know what? Gauthier playing for the U.S. national team, those guys don't fight, right? So I couldn't tell you if he can fight at all. I've never seen it. I can tell you that he is definitely not afraid to play scrappy, play a tough game, make contact and take hits and play physical and especially down low. He is a strong guy. He's a tough kid. In terms of whether or not he could fight, I couldn't tell you, to be honest with you. But no, I see where you're coming from for sure. I think he is a guy that, he's not going to be a Matt Barzal. He's not going to be a Matt Savoy. He's just a totally different player from that. But you know what? If you need a guy who's going to play big and physical every day, you got him. He's a really, really good player. And again, I don't think he has elite skill, but he has good enough skill to carry the puck and to be the guy who drives offense when he needs to. and he's big, strong, and fast. So I mean, he's going to carry the puck to the outside a lot, and I think he'll be fine. I think he'll be fine doing doing everything you need him to do.
All right, before Nick jumps in, any NHL comparables that come to mind?
Not off the top of my head, if I'm being honest. I'd have to think about it. Yeah.
Pete, going into the second round, do you see a player or two maybe that you had your eye on that a team can, get a nice little value with, maybe that could have gone in the first round that slipped a little bit, that you feel has got some really high end skill set or at least a higher ceiling? Question number one. Question number two, goalies. If I'm not mistaken, no goalies taken in the first round, right? So how's that looking to shape up, in round 2 and 3?
Yeah. So I'll answer the goalies first and just say that I don't really know. My understanding from people who know the goalies a little bit better than I do is that this is just not a great year for goalies. I know there's a handful. Our team in Guelph, we've got a guy, Jake Oster, who's pretty promising. He took over the starting job at the end of the year as a 04, playing in the OHL. Pretty impressive. I think he probably will get picked this week, today. I couldn't tell you where. As far as goalies as a whole, though, it doesn't sound like there's a guy, right? I think most years there's one or two goalies that you look at and say, okay, like that's the guy that we're looking for, or those will be the guys off the board first. And this year there just isn't one, unfortunately. In terms of guys in the second round, yeah, I think there's a good bit. Jagger Firkus from Moose Jaw Warriors, just another, like, he's kind of a smaller guy, but he's a goal scorer. I think he's got a lot of skill, a lot of pace, and loves to shoot the puck. Really, really good player. And then the other guy who I love is David Goyette out of Sudbury in the OHL. I had one NHL scout tell me he thinks he's the best player on the rush in the entire class.
Wow.
That's what I want, Nick.
Yeah.
Where do you see him going? Second? Could he drop?
Yeah, I think he'll probably be a second round pick. I think.
Pete, can you say his name again? I'm sorry.
Yeah, David Goyette.
Goyette. Okay.
Plays for the Sudbury Wolves. I think there were a little bit of conversations about maybe him going in the first. Again, something that I had heard from some guys in the league that they think he might be a first round pick. So I don't think he gets too much further. I don't think he's on the board long today. But I really just ultra skilled, fast. He's kind of got a little Trevor Zegras to him, maybe a guy that, like, the concern that I've heard from people is people think he's a little lazy, particularly off the puck. But a guy that, I've talked to some of his teammates, I've talked to guys who've coached him, and they all are like, this kid is a grinder. He loves to, like, he's in the gym all day. He's a film nut. Like, he just works so hard. So all the lazy concerns are a little unfounded. Just
right.
Yeah. Just off on the way he plays and presents himself. I think that's where they're getting that from. But those are the two guys off the top of my head that I would look at and say, yeah, they should go early today, and they could be steals in the second.
Well, unfortunately for the Flyers fans, we need a steal in the third because we do not have a second round
Right.
pick because we threw it in to get rid of Shane Gostisbehere. So the Flyers don't draft till the third round. So hopefully they'll do some maneuvering to get someone of, is it Goyette you said?
Yeah.
His skill set, because, sitting on my hands to the third round is going to cause this host a lot of anxiety. All right, so I'm gonna present this to you, and I know is there anyone in the top 5 that you see that you wouldn't have moved for DeBrincat? I think Ottawa pulled off a major steal yesterday. I believe they gave up their pick and a second and a future third. No players on their current roster for to get DeBrincat, and that was something, we as Flyers fans, we were kind of speculating and hoping they would do. That's not a lot for perennial 30, 40 goal scorer. So your thoughts on that? And then part two, essentially with all the machinations and maneuvering, the Canadians traded Romanoff for Kirby Dach. Was that too much for Kirby Dach? Is he an underachiever that will achieve now? Your thoughts on all those three trades that I just mentioned?
So I mean, I'm a big DeBrincat guy. I definitely think that getting the 7th pick for DeBrincat, I don't know that you're getting a guy who puts up goals like he does for sure in this draft class at all. And then they go ahead and pick a defenseman who I'm not crazy about in Korchinski.
Too early,
yeah, a guy I like, but they probably could have got him with their 2nd pick in the draft, if you ask me. So it was a little bit of a strange one for me, the DeBrincat one especially. And then, sorry, I don't even remember the rest of the question. I guess about the trades in general, right?
The Canadians and the Canadians essentially acquired Kirby Dach and got rid of Romanov.
Yeah,
the defenseman. So that's essentially what they did. The capital they acquired for Romanov, they flipped for Dach. So
yeah. I like Kirby Dach for sure. I think he is a guy that has a lot of potential and a lot of upside.
Big,
still a young player.
I do too. I like him.
He's 21 years old, right? Like he's just a guy that is just going to keep getting better, and he is big. He plays a power game. I get it. I definitely get it. Romanov, I think was an interesting one. It's funny. I have a lot of friends that are Islanders fans, obviously being from Long Island, and I also have a lot of friends that are Habs fans, and they've both sides aren't happy.
Okay.
For whatever that's worth, I think the Islanders fans feel like they gave up too much, and I think the Habs fans feel like they didn't get enough. So to me, that usually tells you it's a pretty good trade.
Right.
I do think Romanov is a good defenseman. I think he'll be a good player for the Islanders. So I think both sides are probably pretty happy going into today.
Well, it's funny. Montreal, when they made that run a couple years ago, they had such a great defensive core. They're all gone. So yeah. It's crazy. And then that's why it's important to nail your draft so that you can replace what you ultimately get rid of. Listen, I had a ton of questions, and you've elaborated on every single one of them, either through Nick's questions or through mine. So, Nick, I have no more questions that jump out at me. How about yourself?
I'm good. I mean, I think we're so lucky to have a guest like you on the show, Pete. Your insight is invaluable. I know you've been grinding it out at the rinks for as far as I know, at least 10 years, maybe even longer.
Just about 10.
And, for the viewers out there, I mean, when people say, well, I hear this, I hear that, and I have a source, I mean, you're the guy that's actually out there, in the stands or in the boxes watching these kids from the time they're 13, 14 years old. And, you've got a real pulse on what's going on, especially some of the East Coast kids, I'm sure. And now being up at Gulf and recruiting for them, I'm sure has got to be just a blast. But no, very enlightening, good stuff. I mean, I'm sure we would love to have you back at some point and, and do this again.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll join Matt Moran on one of these days.
There you go.
That would be awesome, actually, to have both of you on at the same time, and I can just take a nap while you guys talk. But ladies and gentlemen, if you want to, I hate to do this to you, Pete, but if you want to get some insight on round 2 of the draft and next year, any players that you're curious about, reach out to Pete at PeteJudge9 on Twitter, and I'm sure he'll get back to you. Again, Pete is a scout for the Gulf Storm of the OHL, clearly beyond knowledgeable with all this talent that we're watching get drafted, and hopefully we'll see the Flyers do some maneuvering. Again, we are Flyer centric, and we hope that the Flyers do something to move up into the second round. On behalf of Nick Descaltasti, our wonderful guest Pete Judge, I am Dan Old School Green. Continue watching the draft, and perhaps we will put together the dream team package of Pete and Matt, do a complete draft recap. If not, Nick and I somehow will do a draft recap in our Flyer and Ice 5 minutes for roughing, episode. Until then, we will see you guys. Enjoy day 2 of the draft, and until next time, good hockey, everybody.